And it kind of grew from there. The sense of family that we had, I think, with the Bighams, part of that deal. That, of course, all evaporated later and kind of fell apart. But at that time, I really felt like I belonged there, like I could be here. And I since had opportunities to go to the New York and L.A. and Kansas City and so forth. I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay right here. I liked it here. Well, the Courier, of course, you know, they had already had, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 Pulitzer Prizes. You can see that. They'd won those things. And it was just the depth of the paper. They had, my God, they had TV critics, they had theater critics, all sorts of critics. They had great sports writers. And Dave Kindred, one of the best sports writers ever. I put him with Jim Murray and Red Smith. And here's Dave. I'm in the same building with Dave Kindred. Just the talent and the photography that came along with it, and the depth and the professionalism. You know, they made it clear back in my previous jobs. Nobody ever said, "Hey, you can't go out with a source and then have him buy you a meal." You know, nobody ever told me that was wrong. At the Courier, that was absolutely wrong. You couldn't do that. You couldn't, you know, even sell your soul to any degree to a source of any kind. It was
no
just
trips to Cunningham's?
Oh yeah, well there was Cunningham's, there was Teek's, the big bar there.
No, that, you
Oh,
have
okay.
to set that up if you're going to talk about.
Okay.
We used to, I mean, wasn't that a hangout for the?
More Teek's with me, because Teek's was right down Broadway.
Okay.
It was down Broadway about a block. And a lot of them hang out, they'd go out there after work and hang out. Of course, the Times get off work at, you know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is kind of deadly.
Maybe you could, they don't.
Yeah. A lot of the fun part about the Times is we got along so well. When the afternoon deadline came, we'd all go upstairs to the cafeteria in the Courier Journal and get together, and for 5 or 10 of us to get together and tell lies for about an hour or so. Then we'd go over to a bar called Teek's on Broadway. Teek's, New York famous bar. We'd hang out there in a booth for way too long, drinking way too much beer. And again, the same feeling of closeness and comradeship that we had. That, and once in a while we go to Cunningham's, further south of there, for the goodbye parties and things like that, the bigger groups, the more formal groups. But Teek's was an easy walk. As was right across the street from the Standard Review, what was that bar there? That's where the printers went.
Yeah.
Was that Cunningham's? No, they moved then.
S&H.
S&H. Then there was another bar, the printers went S&H right across Aubrey Place from the Courier Journal, so it was just very close in there. Yeah, my first year was a reporter, and they were very patient with me. They did, you know, I'd get assignments, I'd go out and do them pretty well and come back and do them pretty well. But I'd been a columnist in my previous 2 lives. At my hometown weekly newspaper, I was a columnist. In the Rockford paper, I was a columnist, and I kept begging nicely to write a column. This is what I like to do. This is where I belong doing it. This is what I should be doing. And I got some help, a lot of help with that from Greg Johnson at Scene Magazine. Because Greg, they had a guy named Mike Royko, this rookie from Chicago, who won about 19 Pulitzer Prizes. And Royko was their columnist in the Scene at the time. And Greg fired Royko, and he let me take over as a local columnist for the Scene Magazine. And that was just heaven to me. I just loved doing that. And he was very patient with me. You know, when you start out, you don't always write good columns. I think Greg only killed about 2 or 3 of my columns in 5 years. He should have killed maybe 20. But he, you know, he appreciated it was local and it worked. And I liked doing it, so that's what. And then going back to the Times again, I started working with the photographers. We had an editor named Claude Cookman who would let me take the camera out once in a while and take pictures. But then working with the photographers was such a delight because they were such a part of the story. We kind of knit together. And my philosophy was, I'm going to write, they're going to take pictures, I'm not going to get in their way. And they didn't get in my way. We'd help each other with, oh, look over here, there's a deer over there, or something over here. But by and large, we just stay out of each other's way, and I think it worked pretty well. And then the most fun of that for me was, I'd go up to the the laboratory where they made the pictures, and I'd never seen the process before, and they put the negative there, and they shoot it down on this piece of paper, and they put this liquid, and here comes the picture. And it's kind of like words in a story, it just kind of flows up. And I was astounded. And then they could take this and they could play around with it and make it better and fix corners and, you know, make the thing look better or chuck it and start over, which was often the case. They were just very dedicated people. And both photographer and writer had the same end result, to tell the story. And with me, I could ask questions over a period of an hour. Usually you start slow and build up to what you really want to know, but you don't ask those questions first. You wait till the end. And the photographers often had to wait till just the right moment, or the right light, or the right look on their face, or the background was perfect. So that was a lot tougher gig, I think, than what I was doing. I could take my time and ask questions as long as I wanted. Yeah, I talked to Barry Jr. Barry Sr. was still sort of a, you know, we didn't talk much to him. He was around, and I always admired him. He was such an erect figure. I always liked the way Barry Sr. walked. He could walk down the street just like this. His head didn't move, his legs moved. And I just sit there and watch. I wish I could walk like that. But Barry Jr. Wanted to be one of the staff, one of the people. He appreciated journalism. He appreciated what we did. I always felt he would send me notes once in a while. That meant a great deal to me if I wrote something he liked. But my funniest Barry story was we had the Louisville Orchestra challenged the Louisville Times to a softball game. And Barry wanted to play, of course, because it was the opera. So we'll all go out to up River Road. We go to the softball field up there, and Barry shows up. I don't even think he had a glove. We had to loan Barry a glove. And what are we going to do with the boss? Where are we going to put him? Well, second base is the place where you put people doing what the hell they're doing. So we put Barry on second base, and he stood on second base. I'm pitching. And I turn around and say, Barry, get your ass over about 10 feet, baby. You don't play second base on the bag. The worst thing about that, and he did, and I'm not sure he even batted. I think he just played second base, whatever he wanted to do. But the funniest thing about that was Bob Barnhart was one of the guys up with the orchestra, and we thought we'd kill the orchestra. They couldn't possibly beat us. And Barnhart, it turns out, was a very good amateur baseball player, wanted to play in the major leagues. He won about 3 home runs and 4 doubles, and they killed us. So we lost to the Louisville Orchestra. So to make it come out right, I wrote the story in Italian and put it in the paper as you would an opera. The only thing in English was the score. And Greg Johnson, at scene, just a terrific guy, ran the thing in Italian. Vincenzo helped me write the story. I went down to his place. So we had the story of the Louisville Orchestra beating the Louisville Times in Italian in the paper, which is not something you see a lot in the newspapers. And Barry that was one of the funniest moments I've ever seen. Barry, get over. Get over. I can still see him standing there with his mustache, not quite sure what to do, but happy to be there, you know. Which was what. That was fun.
Okay.
Another thing the Courier did a lot in the Times was we'd have meetings. And we'd actually discuss things, which never happened in the last 20 years at the paper. I don't think we had any meetings at all, but the staff would go in there and they'd discuss things, to talk about things. And I forget what the meeting was, but Len Pardue, who was the Times editor, was setting up a slideshow machine, whatever you call it, and it was flat. And Len looks over at Barry and says, Barry, can we borrow your billfold? We need to raise the camera up a little bit. Which you wouldn't think you could ask most editors if they could borrow their billfold. He wanted to get the thing up, but that's one of the funniest things I've ever seen with Barry Bingham. It's funny. And the billfold worked. It was about that thick, and he thought of himself one of the guys, pretty much. No, actually, when I became a columnist, I also wrote a lot of feature stories. And I would have the photographers come along for that. That sounds, no, we'd do it together, like I say. We would do it together. We did stories together. I'd contact them. We talked things over a lot. That was pretty easy. Then eventually I got into Sunday Magazine. There was a couple, 3 years there when I was a Sunday Magazine writer. And I worked with 2 photographers, primarily Gary Chapman and Pam Spaulding. And that was just a delight. We'd go out sometimes for 3 or 4 days, sometimes for a week, and do stories that much in depth. You know, Pam and I did a bunch of stories in the mountains, which was just a joy because you could be together and take pictures together and talk about it at night and at meals and so forth. And then Gary Chapman was the same way. Just very close-knit, focused, on the same page pretty much. We would help each other on site if we saw something over here. But nobody told me how to write, and I wouldn't tell Pam or Gary how to shoot. That'd be crazy. What do I know? But I think the relationship we felt with each other, and the idea that you could give each other tips and hints without, offending them, was very important. I mean, sometimes the photos were so powerful that I go back and rewrite the story and work toward that particular picture. Now with the Sunday magazine, of course, the deadline was, you had like a couple, 3 weeks or a month to get it done before it was in the paper. You had time to do that. A lot of times on the daily stuff you wouldn't. And I wish I'd had. I'd see a picture that was way better than what I wrote, but I didn't quite match it up. But that's daily journalism. But the magazine was so much better in that respect. And we could talk about things and what we wanted to do and not do. That was kind of magic too. That was the best, I think, in terms of journalism. Outside of when I was a Kentucky columnist for a couple of years and wandered the state. But in terms of journalism overall ever, my 30 years, working with the Sunday magazine staff and the photographers was the best time for me because it was a true collaboration. And I really love that. And the Courier was good about that. Well, most of my columns, per se, did not include a picture. But I love working with the photographers and doing feature stories. And I worked with the photo editors. And then after the papers merged, there's just one paper, one photo editor, and I'd work with them a lot when doing that. But primarily is doing the columns. I was with the Courier Journal when I first started as a Kentucky columnist. I was doing 4 columns a week plus a garden column. I was writing 5 columns a week. And a lot of those had pictures, so I'd go out to, that's when I took pictures. I'd go out to Eastern Kentucky or wherever I went, I would, take pictures and bring them back, and then bam, 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 you put them in the paper and then move on. And the good thing about that was when you wrote a bad column, you had time to recover, like the next day. You could write a good one or a better one, but no, the photo elements I like was working with the Sunday magazine and with Chapman and Spalding. Just very hard-working people. When I got the column gig, I wanted, and what they adhered to was leave me the hell alone. I would get ideas. I wanted ideas, but don't ever tell me how to write it, ever. And I wouldn't accept that. And it wasn't like we were that far apart anyway. But Bob, why don't you go out and say something nice about or bad about? Never. It just didn't work that way. Well, did everybody ever reject my columns? A lot of times they should have and didn't. I would have welcomed the rejection. But there was a couple times, and Greg Johnson in particular, Greg was the best editor I ever worked for in the Scene magazine. And Greg he'd nicely say, Bob, this stinks. The subject matter, I don't remember what it was. It was just something, I had to write those on Friday morning for Saturday. I was always on deadline, the next day deadline, and I liked that. I needed a deadline. I couldn't operate without a deadline. But I forget the exact subject matter, but it would be too personal or too off the wall, or obviously written by a guy on deadline with nothing to say. And when you write 3 or 4 a week, that happens. The good thing about a columnist is you learn to deal with that. You learn to write something mediocre and then go on to something better. But I don't remember the subject matter, but I remember Greg killing a couple of them, and thank God he did. But luckily then he would just go back and find a good one, and say, Bob is sick today, or Bob is in Mongolia or something, we're running this. He had a great sense of humor. We're running this one instead, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. Yeah, well, actually, the Courier Journal was, when I went there at first, it was a regional paper. It was the Kentucky paper. They had a bureau in Eastern Kentucky, Central Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Indiana, and then Louisville. So it really did a good job of covering those areas, remarkably well. They had a company plane or planes. They'd fly out to do things and see things. I remember there was a coal mine disaster in Scotia, Kentucky. And I flew out there with the Louisville Times writer, a guy named Ira Simmons. And we luckily, we found, they keep all the family in one room or one barn or something. We luckily were able to get in there before the Courier Journal. This was a great moment in my journalism career. We whipped the Courier Journal in Eastern Kentucky from the Louisville Times perspective. Okay, the Courier Journal had sometimes like 10 pounds of talent in a 5-pound room. They had so much good people, so many good people and photographers, that they could do a story justice to anybody, better as well as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the great papers of its day. They could do equal to that or better because they had amount of talent. You know, they're probably overstaffed if you look at it from a strictly financial point of view. But that was an era when the Binghams, I think I read this somewhere, only wanted like a 3 to 5% net profit. I read this somewhere. And when Gannett bought it in 87 or 89, they wanted a 30% profit right away. So what does that do to your product? It just wipes it out in time. It has in time, but they just took such pride in what they did in certain areas, particularly. I think the coal mines and politics in Kentucky, and there was the Carrollton bus disaster. I think we won a Pulitzer for that. They were all over that. 30-some kids killed, 30-some kids burned in that fire. Things like that, they could just focus like nobody else, and the talent. And at that time, the first 10 years I was there, nobody left the paper unless they were going to the Washington Post or New York Times or Newsweek or somewhere. They went to the very best journalism in the country, or they stayed there. I always found that remarkable. And that changed, of course, after Gannett bought it, and it all gradually. Yeah, and once Gannett took over, the profits went, and I'm just estimating here, from like 3 to 5%, which was all the Bingham family wanted, to 30%. And you can't maintain a product with that kind of changes. You know, that's where the staff is. That's where the research is. That's where the traveling is. All the rest of it that required to be a great newspaper. It just slowly diminished, and then it's all but disappeared. Yeah, the last day of the Louisville Times, it was a sad day, and I went in that morning and wrote a column about the last day of the Louisville Times, what it was like being there, at the death watch. But that day or the day before, we did not want to go out with tears in our eyes. We were proud of what we did, we were proud of who we were. We weren't going to go out that way, so we hired a Dixieland band, and they came into the newsroom, and we marched through the newsroom, waving and swinging and singing, went down the stairs and up and down Broadway with the Dixieland band, saying, this is how we're going to go out. We're going to go out with some pride with our heads up. Although we hated it, but we weren't going to let them win that particular little battle. And I'm glad we did it.
They know what the subject is.
I think we all felt the steady diminishing of the paper and the product and the staff and all. And we hear rumors about how the Bingham family wasn't getting along, that Barry and Sally weren't getting along, Sally being the sister. But I think the sudden demise came as a surprise to just about everybody. It certainly did to me. Later on, there was a book written about it, I think it won a Pulitzer Prize, about the demise of the family, the Bingham family, and obviously the depth of the bitterness was deeper than we realized. At the time, we didn't know it was quite that bad. So we just kind of felt the loss internally and saw it externally. But I wasn't really aware how bad it was until the very end, after the book came out, and we saw we didn't want to believe it, I think, is part of the trouble. We just didn't. Here's this wonderful creation we're all been a part of. It's one of the best papers in the country, and now it's going to be gone. It was the best of times and the worst of times when I was there. Started in 75, the Binghams in their glory had the radio station, WHAS Radio, the TV station, WHAS, the newspaper, Louisville Times and Courier Journal, and they had that whole block, literally. Standard Review printing. They were printing Sunday magazines, inserts all over the country. So this entire block from Broadway, Chestnut, I guess, and Armory to 6th Street, was the Bingham family, and you felt sort of part of that too. And it was all just who we were and what we were, and to watch it diminish and die was just kind of a personal tragedy for all of us, I think. We had so much invested in that, and energy and love and respect for what we were doing, and to watch that slowly go away is pretty tough to do.
You were off to a good start.
Yeah, the most difficult day in the newspaper for me, if not the business ever, was 1989, the Joseph Westbecker shooting I got in early that day to write my column. I always went in early to write the column. And where I was sitting in the sports department was just one wall away from the Standard Gravure printing shop where it was. And over the loudspeaker comes this announcement: there's a man in the building with a gun, just out of nowhere. Please exit boom on toward Broadway. So we all clamber down and go out the building. We go across Broadway, and we're standing there watching as the sirens, screaming, ambulances came up, cops came up, and then they started carrying people out of the building in stretchers. There was 7 people murdered and 13 wounded that day, and it was 1989. This was before all this other killings were going on in the country. A complete and total shock. And we stood there for about an hour watching this. I'll never forget this. George Gill, who was the managing editor at the time, came out of the building. He saw us across Broadway. He walked across the street and looked at us standing there, and he said, "The son of a bitch is dead," talking about Westbecker. And that's just frozen in my mind every time I hear or see of another shooting of what Westbecker, of course, killed himself after killing 7 people and wounding 13 more. And some of those were my friends. One of them I played basketball with. Yeah, I got to spend time with Muhammad Ali a little bit, which also just some of the great moments in journalism. I remember being at the Churchill Downs one derby, and up on the 5th floor where all the rich folks hung out. And these are people all over the world, actresses, Hollywood, kings, queens. Ali walked in that room, and it was just silence. He just took over the place. I've never seen the like of it. You know, he was the greatest. He was. And when his mom died, I went to the funeral, and he called her Mama Bird. And I talked to Ali quite a bit about what she was like and what he was like, what it was like together with them. And he said, everybody thinks their mama's the greatest, which is what he said about everybody. But talking about his mom, and I wanted to write a book about Mama Bird. And it would have been a great book because I never saw one on just her. And she grew up in Western Kentucky, but Ali's wife wouldn't let me do it. Lonnie, what's her name? Lonnie, yeah. Lonnie wouldn't let me do it because there was too much. His father had done, Ali's father, you know, he was such a rounder about a lot of things. And I think she was afraid that it would somehow get over into him. And so my one regret in journalism, I think, I couldn't write a book about Mama Bird, which would have been, you couldn't screw that up, you know. This is Ali's mom. So, and then the other story is, a couple of years later, I was sitting there in the paper, and a guy called me and said, Mama Ali, or Muhammad's at his mother's house. This was before she died. And come on over, why don't you come talk to him? And I didn't know the guy, who it was. But I went over there, and Rahman, his brother, was there. He answered the door, he let me in. And Ali's in there going through the Quran, reading it. And we talked for like an hour and a half about also, I wasn't taking notes, unfortunately, or even tape recording, I wish I had. But we talked for about an hour and a half about just with Ali and being in the same room with him and talking to him. And then I went back to the paper, God help me, well, Pat's it. I went back to the paper, went through the files, and grabbed some Muhammad Ali pictures from the 4th floor. Totally illegal, totally wrong. So it put me in jail. I took them back, and the champ signed them for me. And they're the ones I've got on my wall here at home. But he signed them Cassius Clay, the old ones. And then the new ones he signed Muhammad Ali. So I see that every day now. You know, kind of a reminder of what journalism was, what I did, and it's kind of fun to have. When I first came to Louisville in 1975, that was the summer of the busing demonstrations, the busing riots. And I was new to town, new to everything, and part of my job, being the biggest guy in the newsroom, was to go out and go to these different areas where the people were gathered protesting, and they have bonfires and so forth. And it was they had a demonstration at Freedom Hall at the fairgrounds there. And I was sitting outside Freedom Hall talking to people, and this guy comes up to me and just sucker punched me, just bam, and then ran off. And normally I would have ran after him and killed him, but this time we've been warned by the editors, you know, if anything happens to you, just take it and accept it. And so I went back to the newsroom and probably showed off my bruise on my chin. And they never caught him, I don't think, but that was if I had a scary moment in Louisville, that was probably the scariest in terms of what the hell just happened and what do I do now? Turns out I did nothing, which was as programmed. Not my normal reaction to anything like that.
As you
Yeah,
mentioned,
okay.
the sun just snuck out again.
Serendipity has always been the biggest factor in my life, I think. There's so many things that happened to me, even as a writer, where I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then getting hired in Louisville to begin with, I mentioned the guy named Mike Waller, who grew up in northern Illinois, near where I did. So there's a sort of automatic closeness, even though we never met. So when I went to Louisville Times, Mike hired me, and then I looked around the room, and I'd never been around such talent. And I didn't know how good I was or how good I could be, but I wanted to get better. In that situation, I had to get better. And so, and then the photography was the same way. Just everybody worked hard, had fun, did a terrific job, one of the best papers in the country, and I wanted to be part of that. And so I just was determined to up my game to the level of the people around me. And I think I was able to do that, but with their help, and good editing, really good editing, which has disappeared now from the paper. There's no copy desk. I can't imagine life without a copy desk, but they don't have one anymore. So I credit that with A, being hired here, and then B, being around people that really care. Journalists are just fun people because they come from so many different places, but they all kind of get together in the same pool. I mean, everybody's got a different background. Very few of the people I know grew up wanting to be a journalist or at the Courier Journal. They just all happened because of various reasons and talents and proclivities and geography ended up there. And I just became part of that, and we bonded there. It was just really a nice situation. I was lucky. I was blessed to be with the Bighams. I got that 12 to 15 years of the best. And, no matter what happens ever since or has happened, I'm just so grateful for being able to get that part of my life, verified. It's funny, like people ask me how my life has been, and when I was in school, I always thought I was the tallest kid in my class 12 years in a row. That was my honor. I was able to do that. But just to find out, to end up being exactly what I wanted to do in life, although it took a while to figure that out, in the very place I wanted to do it, is such a rare treat I think, for most people. You really get to be where you want and do what you want and be married 60 years and have 2 wonderfully successful children. Do you really get that? How often? And I got it. And I just loved it, and I'm proud of it, and proud of my relationship with the Courier and the Times and all the people, photographers and writers, and that great bunch that came together did so much good at a certain time. Yeah, I took pictures. Again, Claude Cookman at the Times helped me with that. And once in a while, he'd let me get one in the paper, which was above my raisin. He was really good about that. But in my spare time, I'd go up to the photo department on the 6th floor of the Courier and go in there and we sit around and talk, and I'd go in and watch them develop pictures. And I'd get a lot of guff about it, but the newspapers and journalism runs on sort of a cheerful cynicism. You give each other a lot of stuff all the time, but beneath that, you really care. You want to make a difference. You want to show the moment. You want to tell a story. You want to do all these things. So beneath that cheerful cynicism is what I felt was, an appreciation for what I could do, and I appreciated what they could do. And being able to put both together in the same package was really pretty special. Yeah, I think in my 33 years at the Courier, the worst time I had was when the neighborhoods of Highland Park, Prestonia, and Stanford were declared blighted because UPS wanted the property, and they wanted to throw these people out of there. And it was just a fucking disgrace to have that happen. And I'm still mad about it because the area was not blighted, and the city council and everybody went along with UPS because it was UPS, including the Courier Journal. I think it was like a 1-day embargo on the story. We never really hit it like we should have. I don't remember even editorializing about it. It was just wrong. It's still wrong. And thousands of people, most of them blue-collar workers, had to get out of the neighborhood. And I'm sure many of them, you know, they got the worth of their house in a poor neighborhood or middle class neighborhood, but by the time they bought another house, they couldn't afford it. You didn't have the money for it. It was just wrong, and it's the one black mark in the Courier Journal I have in my entire time there. They should never have done that. They should have never gone along with it. They sold out to UPS, and a lot of that property is still vacant. And Pat McDonough and I, a really good photographer, did a lot of work on that together. We'd go out and we'd talk about it, and then Pat would shoot the people. We went to meetings and protests and so forth. Did a whole Sunday magazine on it.
This was for runways, wasn't it? Was it for?
Runways and
extending the
something,
runway?
and they still
Maybe
have
you
it.
could set,
Yeah.
it was about land to
Yeah.
extend runways
Dual
for their big
runways.
planes.
Yeah, dual runways, yeah. Louisville has the Filson Historical Society, which has been collecting history of Louisville going back 200 or 300 years. And happily for me, all my columns, all my Sunday magazine columns, all my scene columns, and I got 8 different books, are all now in the Filson. A guy named Jim Holmberg helped me do that, and that's a good feeling to know, it's all gonna outlive you. Maybe 20 years from now, somebody looking for research on UPS expansion in the Highland Park will be able to go and read about it, and Pat McDonough's work, and it's right there. It'll be frozen in time.
Or something like that.
Yeah, and that's very important because it preserves a history and a time of those people that lived in Highland Park or Prestonia and Stanford. And maybe 20, 30 years from now, when somebody goes back to do some research on Louisville, they'll see the truth, what really happened, and why it happened, and why it's still so wrong. It's be wrong forever. I get pissed off about that one.
What you,
Actually, it was the Louisville Airport Authority that was condemning the land on behalf of UPS, which wanted the expansion. So UPS was a player, and the authority was the one actually doing the blighted neighborhood thing. And about 5 years later, there was a ruling, maybe from the U.S. Supreme Court, it came down that was not blighted, and they acted incorrectly. But it was too late to change anything. The houses were gone, the neighborhoods were gone. So they won the lawsuit, but way too late.
okay,
And the way they told the people that had the neighborhood was blighted was they walked the neighborhoods and dropped flyers at the houses saying, we've declared this blighted, and, you can protest if you want, but it didn't do any good. I mean, that was the kind of story that inspired me and a lot of other columnists across the country, and a lot of, not just me, but journalists all across the country, to get involved and to try and make a difference. Things that this wrong. I mean, you see the death of journalism in this country now, and it's kind of scary. When there's no newspapers or local media to report the news, who's going to tell the people when the city council's stealing stuff, or the board of zoning is doing this or that? The end of journalism in this country is kind of scary, and we're seeing part of that now.